You are listening to the Love Unplugged podcast, episode 35. Today we are chatting with registered dietitian and author Desiree Nielsen, and we do a deep dive into how the gut functions, starting with the thought of wanting to eat, all the way to, well, let's be real here, going poo. We also get into how issues with your gut can impact your health in many different ways. We go so deep in this chat, so I'm needing to break this up into two parts as it's quite a bit of information to digest. Today is going to be part 1, and part 2 will be coming next Thursday. So make sure you catch part 2 as we get all the ways that you can heal your gut and so much more. So grab yourself a cup of organic tea and let's get to it. You are listening to Love Unplugged, a podcast focused on love in all its forms. I'm your host, Jessica Frigon, hopeful romantic and founder of Project Love. I found that too often love is set aside or taken for granted, and we tend to forget how to care for ourselves and our important relationships in the day-to-day chaos. So let's slow down, tune in, and begin our journey of rediscovering love. From honest heart-to-heart conversations with real couples and knowledgeable guests to deep dive reviews of new products and services that will help you feel beautiful inside and out. If you're looking for relatable advice or wanting to be inspired by real-life love stories, you've come to the right place. Without further ado, let's get to it. Hello friends, today I am joined by Desiree Nielsen, a registered dietitian here in Vancouver, BC, the host of TV's The Urban Vegetarian and author of the plant-based cookbook, Eat More Plants, which I am so going to check out. I'm so excited to look that up. Her focus is based on complex chronic digestive inflammatory disease and plant-based approaches to optimal health, which I am super excited to learn more about because this sounds like a healthy approach to getting healthy, really.
It's good for everyone.
Today we're going to take a very deep dive into the gut. So we're going to get very juicy here. We're going to learn a lot of information about what you should know in order to have a healthy digestive system, which I am super excited about. So let's dive in. Welcome, Desiree. I'm so honored to have you as my guest, and I'm so excited to learn all about your story and all this advice that you're going to give us. But before we start, for those that don't know you yet, I would love for you to share a little bit about who you are.
For sure. So I'm a registered dietitian, and I have been in private practice now for almost 7 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a long time.
I know. Now that I think, I was like, ooh, 7 years. That sounds really cool. Feels like a milestone somehow. I write books. I have Eat More Plants, which came out this year. And then I have Unjunk Your Diet, which I wrote and came out in 2014. And I have a private practice where we actually see clients, one-on-one clients here in Vancouver and all around the world. And and then I guess I do whatever other fun stuff like podcasts that come up.
That's exciting. 2 books.
Two books.
That's a big undertaking.
2 kids. Yeah, my 30s have been a wild ride.
2.
Yeah, like what other 2?
What's coming
up?
So I'd love to start at the beginning. So what inspired you to become a registered dietitian?
I actually wanted to become a doctor and went to UBC not knowing what a dietitian was, but being like, hey, nutrition. I'm really into nutrition, and I know that docs don't get like a lot of training in nutrition, so maybe I should do nutrition as an undergrad, and then I'll go into med school. Mm-hmm. And then when I was at UBC being in nutrition, I was like, oh, like what's this dietetics thing? And I quickly pretty much fell in love because I think a lot of how I intended to practice as a doctor, I didn't realize I could do as a dietitian. And so my commitment to myself was, well, why don't we switch paths, especially because I went back to school a little bit later. Mm-hmm. And so I became a dietitian when I was 29. Mm-hmm. And I told myself I'm going to do this for 5 years. And if it's not everything I thought it was going to be, I'll take my MCAT and I'll figure some medical school will let me in. But I honestly haven't looked back since.
That's awesome. So how did you come to focusing on gut health?
Out
of everything.
It was really unintentional. I have to say it was unintentional. I've always been a big fan of integrative medicine. And so at first I was actually drawn to oncology, because in that community where there's a lot of people who are very unwell and still searching for a lot of answers. And this is something that you, if you are lucky enough, you live with for the rest of your life. So you're always trying to optimize your health. And there's a huge use of integrative medicine in that community. And so I was actually drawn there first. And what happened is when I became a dietitian, my first job, I went into my first and only real normal job, semi-normal job. I went into Choices Markets, which for those of you who don't live here, sort of like a little mini family-owned Whole Foods. And it was there that I was completely overwhelmed by the fact that everyone was talking about their guts. Like everyone wanted to know about their gut health, saying it was off, needing to figure it out. And so I spent a ton of time researching all this stuff that in all honesty, I didn't know because I wasn't prepared for it at all. And as I got deeper into it, I became extremely fascinated by it. And then as luck would have it, probably the universe further pushing me in this path, after the birth of my son, I ended up with IBS. And so, that kind of professional focus became a very personal commitment as well, because I was seeing now all of these things I was being told before. Now I was like, oh, this sucks. And I think it kind of renewed my commitment to double down and make it a focus.
Now, having gone through it, now you totally know why everyone's just gung-ho on trying to figure it out, because it's not fun.
Yeah, if anyone doesn't have anything wrong with your gut, good on you, lucky. But yeah, you can't possibly understand how awful it is. Something I like to say is that digestion is typically the last thing on anyone's mind until it goes wrong, and then it's the only thing you can think about.
Okay, so this might be a little bit too much information, but I really don't care. So what is IBS, and what do you experience physically with that?
So irritable bowel syndrome is a functional disorder. And so what that means is if you go in and you get a scope done of your gut, which is not the funnest thing, but if you do that, you're not going to see anything wrong with the gut, except in the most extreme cases. The gut will look normal, but the function of the gut is significantly off. So for someone with IBS, particularly the people who it's advanced enough that they might come to see me in my practice, there's a significant amount of daily pain. So, and you experience that pain around sort of bowel movements. So it either gets better or worse around a bowel movement. It gets better or worse as your bowel movements change, from diarrhea to something else and then back again. And it's really a daily occurrence. The diagnostic criteria says that it really should only be at least a couple of times a week, for at least a few months. But most of the people who come to see me with IBS, this is a significant daily occurrence, to the point where if you're having a bad morning, you might call in sick to work because you don't think you're going to make your commute.
Okay, so it's intense.
It can be really intense. And the goal is to figure out why it's occurring in your body, and then kind of tackle each one of those root causes on its own, because you can get to the point with IBS that your gut is always going to be more sensitive than someone who doesn't have it. But a great example is I've had IBS for almost 10 years and I've only had 2 major flares. And so, yeah, my gut's a bit sensitive and I know how to take care of it now so that it feels its best, but it's not the same as before I ever had it, for sure.
Gotcha. Okay, so let's get to know our guts. When we eat, so I read this in a book and it completely fascinated me. So for anybody who doesn't know how it all works, it was totally fascinating. So explain to me food, how it goes from your mouth all the way down to your rectum.
Okay, let's do this. I totally love this. I was actually just writing about this yesterday for something. When you eat, actually before you eat, the process of digestion begins. So as soon as you start thinking about eating, so say you're I'm hungry, I'm going to make myself some lunch. As soon as you do that, your brain starts sending messages to your digestive tract to prepare it for the digestion process.
Interesting.
Pretty crazy. Think about it. So think about sucking on a really sour lemon right now.
My mouth watered.
Your mouth waters, exactly. Thinking about the lemon produced saliva in your glands, and it released that saliva. The reason why you need that saliva is as soon as you put food in your mouth, that saliva contains amylase, which is a carbohydrate enzyme. So if you were to put like a little piece of white bread in your mouth and not chew it, the amylase would just break it down all on its own. Word to the warning, if that happens with anything you eat, it's probably not super healthy. But it can happen. So the amylase starts to break down the carbohydrates in the food, and then you chew. You chew, and the saliva lubricates the food. And chewing is actually one of the most critical parts of the digestive process. Most of us barely chew our food. Like really, really, we don't chew our food. You know, our parents would have been like, oh, chew your food like 100 times. Just try chewing your food 20 times, like at dinner tonight. But the reason why it's so important is because everything that happens next is based on surface area. So when you grind and tear the food with your teeth, you're increasing that surface area for all of the enzymes that are going to attack those nutrients and break them into absorbable pieces. So then you swallow. And once you swallow, you completely give up conscious control of digestion, except for the very end event. We'll talk about that in a second. So what happens is that your nervous system, your gut is really heavily innervated, which means it has a lot of nerve cells. There's actually more nerve cells in your digestive tract than there are in your spinal cord. And so your nervous system initiates a rhythmic wave called peristalsis that moves everything through. It takes more than just gravity to like help all that food through. Because if you think about it, you have like meters and meters of digestive tract all crammed into your abdomen, and it takes a lot of twists and turns, and like gravity will not get you there. So once you do that, it goes into your stomach. The presence of food in your stomach and the physical stretching of your stomach activates more stomach acid, protein enzymes that start breaking down. So the acid proteins look like little knots. And so the acid starts unraveling those knots, and then the protein enzymes start cutting it up so that you can digest it better. But then the muscles in your stomach also sort of like, it's like a mixing bag. So like the stuff that you swallow gets mixed up with those acids, mixed up with those enzymes. It's completely liquid at that point. And then slowly, hopefully relatively slowly, it starts exiting the stomach and going into the small intestine, where then you get like a huge amount of digestive secretions that come from your pancreas that have like protein, fat, and carbohydrate enzymes, bile salts, which neutralize the acid because your stomach is super acidic and all your digestive secretions are really basic or alkaline. So it neutralizes that. And then that's where everything that you eat, all of those nutrients get broken down into absorbable tiny little bits. They absorb through the small intestine, go into your circulation, and then your body sort of does what it does with them. Anything that you don't digest and absorb there stays in the gut, and the lower down in your small intestine it gets, the closer it gets to bacteria. So you get into the large intestine, and as you enter the large intestine, there's trillions of bacteria there. And I love your face. You're like, this sounds so gross. I am never eating again. So the trillions of bacteria that live in your large intestine ferment whatever's left. So like your digesta is their dinner. And if you got a lot of fiber that's left over, if you ate a lot of high fiber plant foods, you are going to feed a whole bunch of beneficial bacteria that do like so much good stuff for you. They help to decrease inflammation. They help to improve neurotransmitter production in your nervous system. They may improve mood. They may alter cravings and appetite. Like the research there is amazing. There's a lot of questions we still have, but generally speaking, eat a whole bunch of good healthy plants with a ton of fiber, feed the right bacteria in your colon, and then once they sort of have their way with that, whatever's left over takes a pretty slow boat Your small intestine is like quite long, quite twisted and turned, but things get through it in a couple of hours. Your large intestine is pretty straightforward, pretty short. It just like crosses your abdomen and then heads on out. But it can easily take 12 to 24 hours for it to do that. You absorb as much water when it's working well. You absorb any additional water that might be in your gut. It compacts, turns it into feces. You feel the urge to go that you don't have control over. And then most of us are lucky enough to have control over deciding when we do go. And then out it goes.
That's a lot.
It's a lot. It's pretty cool.
That's insane that your body can actually do all that.
Well, and that it does it, I think, especially after childbirth, you realize just how intelligent your body is. It just does all of this stuff without your conscious input, without your permission. And this is the machinery of life. And particularly for the gut, like as a dietitian, you sort of learn about all these basics, right? Like, how does digestion and absorption occur? Like, what goes wrong? How do you optimize it? And even that's pretty amazing, because if you don't digest and absorb the food that you eat, deficiencies occur. If you're a kid, there are growth issues, there are learning issues, your hair can fall out if you don't get enough iron or protein. Like, there's all these things that happen, but really fascinated me. And I think what's really attached a lot of passion to digestive health for me is the intersection between digestive health and nervous system health and immune health and inflammation, because like gut is sort of ground zero for so much that goes on in the body. And people don't really think, oh, well, I'm at more risk for cold and flu if my gut's not doing well, or I have autoimmunity, or I have depression, and that might be connected to what's going on in my gut. And that really kind of blows it wide open for me and really gets me going.
So I love that you started to talk about that, because I want to know, for people that don't realize that gut is really kind of the root of a lot of issues that you can have in your health, what conditions or symptoms can you experience when your gut is off?
It's really connected, and sometimes it's a chicken or an egg scenario. We don't know if what's going on in the gut was caused by what's happening systemically or vice versa, or both and. But a really great example is type 2 diabetes, where your tissues, your cells are very resistant to insulin, which means that it doesn't take up your sugars well. That can be connected to inflammation occurring because of the type of bacteria in your gut. Depression and anxiety, we have numerous trials that suggest that probiotics may be supportive, which is mind-blowing. Saying that, however, if you run out to the store, there are 0 probiotics on the shelves that have actual research to fight depression and or anxiety. But in the research, we're seeing some really interesting stuff happening with the strains. We know that, of course, there are all the digestive diseases. So Crohn's disease, colitis, IBS, but chronic inflammatory stuff, a lot of autoimmunity, your thyroid, rheumatoid arthritis, chronic fatigue syndrome. Many of these conditions go hand in hand with derangements in gut health.
That's insane. I know when my gut is off, which before it used to happen quite often, I get very foggy brained. I can't think clearly. I'm tired. I'm moody. I'm depressed. And I never thought that it would ever be connected to my gut.
Yeah. And it's a classic, particularly the brain fog is sort of a classic symptom of people either with celiac disease or non-celiac gluten sensitivity. But in order to make that connection, what people have to realize is that your gut, in addition to all the crazy cool and disgusting stuff that it does in the process of digestion and absorption, it's considered your gut is continuous with the outside world from entrance through exit. And so it's actually a very important barrier between you and the outside world, just like your skin is. And for that reason, 70% of your immune function is concentrated along that gut border. So if the barrier function of your digestive tract is off because of like diet or because of stress, it activates an inflammatory response in your immune system that, if it's minor, if your immune system can clean it up in a couple of days, probably won't have a major effect. But if this is something that's ongoing and it continues to happen, that inflammation is everywhere because your gut is heavily innervated. That nervous system doesn't exist in isolation. There's an enormous amount of messages being relayed between the brain and the gut at any given moment. And the vast majority of those messages actually come from the gut to the brain.
Wow. I never understood how the gut could affect your brain. How could it affect your skin? Like your moods? Like how does it do that?
There's still a lot of questions. Like even with all the research we have, there's a lot of still unclear as to the exact mechanism. But the groundwork is there. So because you've got 70% of your immune function in the gut, your immune, like I say, your gut is not Vegas. What happens there does not stay there, because when those immune cells are activated, they are in circulation, which means they are circulating around your body. 90% of the serotonin in your body is produced in your gut, not in your brain. And for a long time, we'd be like, oh, that's neat. So I guess your brain just doesn't need that much serotonin. And like all your gut serotonin is about your gut, and then your brain serotonin is about your brain. But no, that's not the case, because those neurotransmitters activate your nervous system, and then those messages are relayed to your brain. And now in the research, you're starting to see these snippets of, because we talk a lot about like leaky gut or gut barrier dysfunction. We're starting to talk about leaky brain, because there is a blood-brain barrier as well. It's supposed to sort of sequester your brain from what's going on in your circulation. But in fact, and there's studies are still controversial and they're still very early. But what I've been starting to see when I have the time to read is there's some evidence that when the gut leaks, what's happening is the gut bacteria that are in the gut, very good for you in your gut, they enter circulation. They're not supposed to be there. Your body sees that as an infection. And your immune system then is designed to sort of like eradicate those bacteria. So it increases inflammation. The challenge with inflammation is it does the job, but it's pretty messy when it does it. So inflammatory response causes cellular damage. And there is some research that shows that in the brain of people with depression, there are bacterial fragments in the brain. So then the immune system is inflamed, trying to clear out those bacterial fragments. And we know that depression is not just an issue of serotonin, which is what we once thought, but in fact, there is a degree of inflammation involved. In the joints of someone with arthritis, there is evidence that there are bacterial fragments in those joints. And so therefore, it's not just this random inflammation. Your immune system is trying to do its job. It sees that bacteria. It knows they shouldn't be there, and it's causing the inflammation. Like I said, it's very early evidence, but it makes a lot of physiological sense. And it's starting to really change the way that we think about the body. Because I even, like a decade ago, when I was trained, we think of everything in systems, right? It's like, this is the digestive system, this is the endocrine system, this is the cardiovascular system. Never do you talk about communication and connection between those systems. But of course it exists. It's just way too damn complex for us to even begin imagining. But now we're starting to do that. Now we're starting to study and investigate things in a far more holistic and a far more intelligent way, because of course there's no invisible barriers in our body. It's like, oh, that's the cardiovascular system. I'm a gut cell. I'm not gonna, I'm gonna have nothing to do with that heart.
It's all intertwined.
It's all intertwined, and modern medical science is way younger than people take for granted. So there's so much. I still think that there's so much we don't know about the body. Like the microbiome is a relatively new discovery. We're talking like maybe 15, 20 years of like earnest research. We didn't even discover the endocannabinoid system until extremely recently. So there's like a whole universe within that I think still contains enough mysteries. There's gonna be lots to learn for decades to come.
Wow. So what starts issues in the gut? What exactly can cause the issues? Is it just what you're eating, or can it be anything else that can affect it?
I think one of the most frustrating things as a dietitian, but also as the individual seeking help, is that for any one person, we will never know exactly what tipped the needle. Like, what tipped you into IBS? What initiated that celiac disease or that Crohn's disease? We're never going to know. So in the research, we have a lot of, this seems to be associated in 50% of people, or this seems to increase your risk by 3 times. But with the gut, it really is kind of a holistic process. So nutrition, absolutely. One of the most powerful things we can do to support better gut health is to eat single ingredient, whole foods. So ditch the boxes and the bags and just eat real food. Most of us in North America are not doing that. So it's a huge factor. Inactivity is a big deal. I mean, it's all the same stuff, right? Dr. Dean Ornish said very eloquently that like chronic disease is the same problem manifesting itself in different ways. So some people get IBS, some people get heart disease, some people get diabetes. And that's based on their environment, how they're eating, how they're moving their body, where their stress is, but then also their genetics. And because I'm old enough, like when I was a kid, before I wanted to be a doctor, it was kind of like the Human Genome Project, it was like those early days when people were like, we're going to map the genome and then we're going to be able to tell you if you're going to get like a heart attack when you're 48, or if you're going to have like dementia when you're 72. Like that's what people thought we were going to be able to do. And then they map the genome and they're like, okay. So it's nice to know, but we still can't tell you, even with celiac disease, a third of us bear the genetic predisposition for celiac disease, but a third of the population doesn't have it. So it's like some mixture of like environment and lifestyle have to flip the switch on your genetic predisposition before the disease manifests itself in your body.
Interesting. Yeah. Does everybody have a different gut and the way that it works and the environment and bacteria? Like, is it different by person or is it basically similar?
There are so many things. I mean, we all technically have the same gut machinery, but we can both have the same gut. We can both have similar lifestyles and have 2 different gut outcomes. Bacteria appear to play a big role in that. And there we're all 100% unique. So our gut microbiome or microbiota is as unique to us as our fingerprint. So no 2 people have exactly the same gut microbes, which again, now with the whole like human microbiome project, it's like echoes of like the genome project back in the 90s. Was it the 90s? I think so. We were like, okay, so as soon as we know the microbiome, we'll be able, same thing, to tell you like what foods you should eat, what foods you shouldn't, or like what diseases you're more at risk for, or even what is the optimal gut microbiome. And we can't tell you that because A, the research isn't that far enough along yet, but B, what it appears is that there is like redundancy in function, so that it's probably not type X, Y, and Z in terms of gut bacteria that are most important, like everyone should have these ones and no one should have these ones, but that everyone needs to make sure that they have the types of bacteria that provide functions X, Y, and Z, and to have fewer of the bacteria that have the functions of A, B, and C. So understanding which bacteria have which functions and which functions are absolutely critical is still like a massive question.
Okay.
You said we're going deep. We're going deep.
We're going deep. This is like a whole book.
Exactly. There you
We're
go.
just going through a book right now.
Yeah. I'm just working out my next...
There you go. Your third book is going to be coming out 2021. What is the difference between the good bacteria that our gut produces or has, and then the bad bacteria?
Yeah.
So how does bad bacteria get in there, or does it?
Yes.
Okay.
So, and the cool thing is the concept of good or bad in bacteria is similar to the concept of good or bad in food. You could say that there is really no good or bad. There are better and less good. But with good gut bacteria, quote unquote, what they do for you is a whole bunch of things. So there are bacteria that help directly fight off more disease-causing bacteria. There are bacteria that help you build up and maintain a really strong gut barrier. There are bacteria that help decrease inflammatory response in the immune system. There are bacteria that help improve neurotransmitter production in the nervous system. There are bacteria that produce vitamins for you, that help you absorb more minerals like calcium and iron. And then there are bacteria that are driven to attack the gut barrier and try and break through the gut barrier, which is going to cause an inflammatory response. These are the bacteria that actually thrive in a more inflammatory environment. However, many of us have these bacteria in us. Like most people would be surprised to know that in our, like a normal healthy gut microbiota, we have viruses, we have fungi, we have yeasts, we have it's not just bacteria. It's a lot of bacteria, but it's not just bacteria. And some of us even carry bacteria like Clostridium difficile, which is that superbug that can kill you. But some of us actually have this living in our gut right now, and we're completely symptom-free. And the reason why that happens is because our good bacteria are so strong and so healthy that they keep populations of bacteria like the E. coli's and like the C. diffs of the world down. And it's only when something disturbs the community of good bacteria that bacteria like C. diff are the ones that can make you sick. In all honesty, the way, in their own bacterial way, they sense that they have an opening and they start multiplying. And when they get to a certain level, that's when they can kind of exert their influence and make you sick. So a really great example is C. diff, which can make people extremely sick. It can cause death, particularly in very young or very frail elderly patients. You don't get C. diff infection if you have a strong gut microbiome. You just don't. If your gut bacteria is super solid and you're super healthy, it doesn't happen, which is why we would say that no one in their 20s and 30s will ever get C. diff. It just doesn't happen, except now it happens. And we're seeing it all the time. It's otherwise, quote unquote, healthy people, they have no chronic disease. A woman might get a gnarly urinary tract infection and the antibiotics don't work. And then she goes on another set of antibiotics because there's a lot of E. coli that causes UTIs that are antibiotic resistant now. It's a whole other issue. But then it messes with her already maybe compromised, maybe she's a super junk food junkie and pretty stressed out at work, and that's why she's eating all the junk food. So it was already fairly compromised, and then you give it a couple heavy doses of antibiotic and you're boom, now she's got C. diff. And she's 28. And it happens way more than people expect. And so I find it's really fascinating because we're super obsessed with gut stuff right now. And I think on one hand, people are overdiagnosing certain things like leaky gut and small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. They're everyone has SIBO. No, not everyone has SIBO. It's super serious. It's super intense. But at the same time, I think we're underestimating the fact that many of us can still be healthy and feel pretty normal, but there's already changes happening in our gut bacteria that make us susceptible for stuff like that. So even if you feel amazing, gut health should be on your radar, not in an alarmist way, but what can I do? How can I eat more? How can I eat more plants? How can I eat more fermented foods? All that stuff to keep me well because my life is crazy or whatever.
That piece right there just blew my mind. I can't believe that because I get, UTIs once in a while.
Yeah, it's
not fun.
If you've got those parts, like we've all had them.
Yeah, it's definitely, and you give me the antibiotics, yes. Right?
And and I should be clear too. I'm not saying not to take them.
Yeah.
Because in all honesty, like if you have that, it can turn into a really serious kidney infection.
Mm-hmm.
You want to take the antibiotics and get rid of it as soon as possible.
Yeah.
But you also want to be intelligent about it too, like cranberry to help de-stick those E. coli and make them easier to kill, and probiotics that help support you while you're taking antibiotics so that that imbalance doesn't occur that leaves you susceptible to something else happening later on.
So you should be taking probiotics.
Yes.
When you're taking antibiotics.
And there is a huge amount of misinformation and conflicting opinions out there because it makes perfect sense. If you're taking an antibiotic designed to kill bacteria, why would you take a probiotic? Because isn't the antibiotic just going to kill the probiotic?
Yeah.
And the answer is yes and no. So the most important thing when you're taking antibiotics is to separate your probiotic from your antibiotic. So you take your antibiotic, you wait like 2 or 3 hours, and then you take your probiotic. So it allows the antibiotic to clear through your system, and then you put the good bacteria back. Some of them are going to die the next time you take that antibiotic, but it's better that they do than your gut bacteria do. It's a little bit like a sacrificial lamb scenario.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And the thing is you just keep putting that probiotic into your system until you've done taking your antibiotics. You give yourself a little bit of buffer afterwards because the probiotic stands in, like I mentioned, that redundancy, like multiple bacteria do multiple things. So the probiotic may be totally different from your gut flora, but they do the things that your gut flora also does. And so they stand in for it. They keep you less inflamed. They help fight off those gnarly bacteria. They stand in for those functions while your own bacteria is being assaulted by the antibiotic so that you don't run that risk.
Does your own bacteria then kind of repopulate? Like how long does it take for that to happen?
So there's been a bunch of research done on like the quote unquote plasticity, the idea of like it bouncing back. And so initially the idea was, yes, so you take an antibiotic and you don't do anything and your gut bacteria bounces back. Like they see that in numbers, it bounces back. However, other research was done to show that it bounces back, but it's not the same. And so the idea is if you take a probiotic that yes, it is protecting your own kind of balance so that it does bounce back properly and less affected than it would have been otherwise.
All right. That's very good information to know.
Especially because it's cold and flu season, although most of those are caused by viruses and you should not be taking an antibiotic. But, just in case one lands on your lap, take a probiotic.
I definitely avoid antibiotics unless I have a UTI. Definitely.
Yeah.
You talked about leaky gut.
Mm-hmm.
I want to talk about what that is.
Yeah.
How does that happen? And how do you know you have it?
I know, it sounds like internet hooey, doesn't it? Like, and in all honesty, a lot of people still think it is internet hooey, which I always find interesting, particularly as health professionals, because there is an enormous amount of published research papers available on what we call technically gut barrier dysfunction. Dysfunction in the barrier, aka leaky gut. So how do you know you have it? We don't really have, and I think one of the reasons why there is resistance in kind of like the allopathic or conventional medical community to leaky gut is we don't really have great testing to be like, whoa, your gut's leaking. Like I see like off the charts of X marker, definitely your gut's leaking. We don't really have a lot of agreed upon testing. So oftentimes it is the association of leaky gut with another condition, for example, autoimmunity, where we say, well, you have this serious autoimmunity. We can expect there's probably a little bit of leaky gut. In digestive disease, where like they actually do a scope to diagnose, that's way clearer. Like we know if you have celiac disease, your gut is leaking all over the place. If you have Crohn's disease, ulcerative colitis, and you're in a flare, your immune system is currently destroying your gut. And so it's super, super leaky. Like, we know that for sure. It's more the autoimmunity, leaky gut kind of connection that's considered a little bit more controversial, but we still see it in the literature. The gut barrier dysfunction is there. So what do you do? And I think that's the big question that there are a lot of answers to, and a lot of conflicting answers, depending on who you talk to, because the idea is generally agreed upon, like, whatever is potentially harming your gut barrier function, eating a ton of junk, not eating enough fiber, being super stressed out, like not being active, like you want to remove all of those. Then you also want to do whatever you can to help repair it. And depending on the person, there's a whole bunch of different options. Like, protein becomes really critical in healing time. And some people might benefit from a very specific amino acid, which is like a building block of protein, called L-glutamine. Because when there is trauma, L-glutamine becomes what we call conditionally essential, which means like the body, it's not essential to life, like if you're just normal and healthy and happy, but when a significant trauma occurs, like burn victims, for example, are often given L-glutamine to help them build and repair. So L-glutamine helps build and repair the gut lining, but it doesn't work, and it's not evidence verified in like every single digestive disease. Zinc becomes really important. Zinc is like a primary substrate for the gut cell, but also for the immune system. So you might need a bit more zinc at this point in time to help support your healing. The other thing is to make sure that you are feeding gut bacteria properly, because when you feed gut bacteria fiber, they ferment. And they make something called short chain fatty acids, which are exactly as they sound, like tiny little fats. But those tiny little fats, like 90% of them become immediately absorbed into the gut cell. And it's actually the primary fuel source for the gut cell. So it's like you feed the bacteria, they excrete what is their waste, which becomes fuel for your body's healing. And it's a pretty elegant little system. But if you have like Crohn's disease, where like you've got like, 25 bowel movements a day, and a salad goes out looking like it did coming in, you're like, how do I give my gut bacteria fiber? Like, that's where a dietitian comes in to like figure out what will not feel really, really awful in your body, but will give you what you need to heal.
Okay, so we talked about probiotics, and I want to dive in deeper to that. But first question on it is, what is the difference between probiotics and prebiotics?
Yes. So a probiotic is the bacteria. It's most of the time bacteria, sometimes yeasts, but the bacteria that do all these wonderful things for you. Prebiotics are food for the probiotics. So prebiotics feed bacteria. However, there is actually a changing definition of what a prebiotic is, because like I talked about, like good bugs like plants, like good bugs eat fiber and then they ferment it all up, make those short chain fatty acids, and that's super awesome. So we focused, and there's actually like, people would be surprised how much research there actually is on prebiotics. So eat enough prebiotic and you will boost your levels of good gut bacteria without ever taking a probiotic. There's a catch though. You have to consume so much prebiotic that it would cause many people, even with a relatively healthy gut, like a bit of gut distress. So most of the research on prebiotics is done on a fiber called inulin, which is found in like chicory or in Jerusalem artichokes. And you have to take between like 5 and 20 grams of inulin a day in order to have like a noticeable boost in your gut bacteria. And when you do digestive health and nutrition, like there's no way anyone with IBS or Crohn's disease could take 20 grams of inulin. Like they would honestly just be on the toilet for the next 24 hours and it would be awful. So for something that's so evidence-based, I find myself almost never encouraging people to take prebiotic supplements. And it's why also when you see probiotic supplements that have prebiotic in it, you're kind of like, well, because it's usually in like 100 milligrams or like 50 milligrams. And you're like, oh yeah, that's nice. It'll feed those bacteria for like the nanosecond after that capsule opens. But it's not actually enough to sustain all the trillions of your gut bacteria. And so what I typically recommend is that people just eat like a wide variety of plant foods, and then they're going to get a broad spectrum. There's actually an estimated 100 different types of fiber, which is insane because I certainly don't know all the different types. And I was like, I read that. I was like, how are there 100? I'm like, soluble fiber, insoluble fiber, like resistant starch. Yeah, apparently there is as many as 100 different fiber structures. And so there was a study that came out that's really made the rounds because it's such a nice, easy, livable rule that if you consume at least 30 different plant foods every single week, you'll do a much better job of having a diverse and flourishing gut bacteria than people who eat fewer than 30 types.
I honestly thought that there was only one type of fiber. I feel like such an idiot.
Well, I mean, my face is red because I'm like, there's 100? Okay, now I need to figure that out. Like the first time that I read that, and it was actually a dietitian out of the UK who she's a PhD and she's like a research dietitian. She's like, yeah, there's like 100 types of fiber. And I was like, excuse me? Because I was like, oh yeah, there's a handful. Oh yeah, I know a handful, you know? Apparently there's 100 fiber structures.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm Jessica, and thanks for tuning in today to Love Unplugged, the podcast. If there are any questions or topics you'd love answered on the show, head on over to www.projectloveco.com and share your request with me. If you haven't yet, go to iTunes and subscribe, rate, and review this podcast and share it with a loved one. Your feedback means the world to me, and the community we've created is what fuels our discussions here. After all, this is all for you. Join me next time for another unplugged conversation.